I'm going to start. Thank you folks for sticking around. My name is Nancy. I'm an undergraduate student here at the University of Utah. Actually, I graduated last week. But, I work in the atmospheric sciences department, and the work that I'm going to talk about today was funded by Friends of the Great Salt Lake. Thank you. Through the Doyle Scholarship. Before I get into the research, I want to thank my group, the art group. The work that I've done, I had a lot of help from a lot of different people, so I just want to highlight the folks who've helped me throughout the years, and my wonderful PI, Gannett, who runs such a fantastic group, and ultimately created a really great undergraduate research experience for myself. So thank you to them. Okay, we heard a lot about dust from the Great Salt Lake, so I'll just do a very simplistic overview of what's happening. The Great Salt Lake is drying up, and as it's doing so, it's leaving behind dry, exposed lake bed. And wind will come, and it'll pick up dust from the surface of this lake bed. So this clip right here does a really good job of showing just how much dust can sometimes be kicked up off of the lake. This was taken about a year ago today from the University of Utah. And the biggest thing to take away from this clip would be that not only is our valley being affected by the dust, but the dust is reaching all the way up into the Wasatch Mountains. And if there's snow in the mountains, that has a lot of negative consequences. And the reason for this is because when snow is clean, when there's no dust on its surface, it's very white and bright, and it's very reflective. So when the sun comes and hits the surface of the snow, a lot of its energy actually just gets reflected right back off. But then when dust gets deposited on the surface of the snow, it turns like this dark brown, ugly color. And besides just being less pretty, it also reduces the reflectivity of the snow. So now, when the sun hits the surface of the snow, a lot of that energy will actually be absorbed into the snow, and this causes it to melt faster. And that's problematic for a couple of different reasons. The first is that a lot of the fresh water that we consume here, the majority that we consume here in the Salt Lake Valley, comes actually from snowmelt. So as the spring season comes in and the weather starts to warm up, the snow will start to melt off of the mountains and trickle down into the valley, and we can capture that water and use it as a source of fresh water. But what happens when dust gets on the surface of the snow and causes it to melt faster is that we actually are not able to capture all of this water because it's coming down too fast and all at once. So a lot of usable fresh water will get lost if the snow melts too fast. Another issue is that it shortens the ski season. So a big part of the economy here in Salt Lake City is ski resorts. And if the snow is melting faster, the season is getting shorter, and millions of dollars are lost, so it's not good for the economy. So dust on snow is a bad thing, and we want to prevent it as much as possible, and one of the key steps to preventing it are going to be studies that highlight that this is actually an issue that's happening. But as folks have touched on a little bit previously in the other presentations, the instrumentation that actually samples dust is somewhat lacking here in the Salt Lake Valley, and that's probably a surprise, or it might not be so much of a surprise after the talks that have just happened, but Salt Lake City is known for a very strong atmospheric sciences scene, so you would imagine that it should have a good fleet of instrumentation to be doing this, but as it turns out, the vast majority of the instrumentation that is used to sample particulate matter that's suspended in the air is for smaller particles, PM 2.5. So dust is a bigger particle. It's about 10 micrometers in diameter, so it falls under a category called PM10, that stands for particulate matter with a diameter of 10 micrometers. And that's still pretty small, like 1,000th of a centimeter, but it's quite large compared to other particulate matter like smoke or the exhaust that comes from your car. that would be PM 2.5, and it's the same naming convention. It's particulate matter with a diameter of 2.5 micrometers or less. And that's 4 times smaller than a dust particle. So the majority of the instrument that's in place right now to measure the particulate matter that's in the air, in the atmosphere, is geared towards measuring PM 2.5. But as we've seen, it's equally as important to get dust measurements. So a very large portion of my undergraduate research has been to establish an instrument here at the University of Utah in Salt Lake City that does a good job of sampling dust. So that is her right there, and that's me working on it. It's in the William Browning building, which is here on campus. And for the Hart group specifically, the idea is to use this instrument in tandem with other instruments that are located up in the mountains. So there's a sample site up right across from Alta, which I think like the banquet's being held at. But it's right across the street from that, and it's called Atwater. And it's got this tower. This is actually like very tall, but snow last year went all the way up to the foot of it, so it's kind of crazy. But it's got instruments on it, and our group actually has an instrument that gets put there in the spring, and it can sample dust. So if these 2 instruments can work together, we can get a comprehensive view of what dust looks like here in Salt Lake City. Okay, so what exactly is the instrument that I have been spending a better part of 3 years working on? She's in all her glory on the right-hand side. It's called a TEOM. It stands for Tapered Element Oscillating Microbalance. It's kind of a mouthful, but the key words are the last 2 words, oscillating microbalance. That basically sums up what this instrument does. So in the bottom of the instrument, there's a larger box portion. Within that box, there are these 2 microbalances, and they look just like that right up there. And they're very simple. It's just kind of like it's a tube, and a small filter sits on top of this tube. And when the instrument is operational, when it's running and taking data, these 2 microbalances will oscillate, like the name suggests. So they'll wiggle back and forth. And then what happens is that air, so whatever air that you're sampling, here it's air from outside. It's going to get pulled down into the instrument. Our air comes down through that pipe, down into the instrument and across these filters. And any particulate matter that happens to be in that air will get deposited onto the surface of the filter. And when that happens, the filter actually gets, what would seem a bit obviously, a little bit heavier. So your microbalance and your filter, they get a little bit heavier, and that actually makes those oscillations get a little bit slower. So the instrument can detect this change in the wiggling speed, and it can use that value to calculate the mass of the particulate matter that was deposited on the filter. So essentially what this instrument does is it gets mass concentration values of particulate matter that's suspended in the air. Okay, so there are 2 filters, 2 microbalances, 2 filters. And the reason for this is because the TEOM actually can measure both PM 2.5 and PM 10 at the same time. So it's a pretty cool instrument. You can get those smoke particles, the stuff that probably we hear more about, but it can also get these larger dust particles. And the way that it does this is right above the instrument, there's an inlet. And I apologize for the photo quality, but that's what it looks like. It's basically like a metal vent, and it sits on top of the instrument, and it just prevents particles that are bigger than 10 micrometers from getting into the instrument. So it makes sure that you're only getting PM 10 and lower into the instrument. But I actually lied earlier when I said that dust is 10 micrometers in diameter, because if you want to get a larger fraction of the dust, you have to go to even higher sizes than PM 10. So you got to get closer to like 13 micrometers or something, so PM 13. Luckily, our group has a PM 13 inlet on the roof of the William Browning building, and that's what it looks like. It's very tall. So what I've done is I've connected the TEOM instrument to this PM 13 inlet. So what it's able to do is it's still getting the PM 2.5, but it has an enhanced ability to sample dust because now it's also sampling PM 13. So if we go back to that event that I showed right at the beginning of the presentation, this is a really good example of the value of such an instrument. Again, just to reiterate, this was a year ago from today, May 17th, 2023. We call it like a dust event. I think someone else mentioned it's a pretty short period of time, but there's like high wind speeds, lots of dust is getting kicked up during this period. So this happened right around 7 p.m. on that day, and it just so happens that I was able to get TOM data during this particular event, and it looks something like this. So what you're looking at here, the green curve is PM 2.5 mass concentrations, and this is over the course of 4 days. And then the purple curve is PM 13. So I think it's pretty obvious when the dust event happens. You can't see it, it's this large peak right here, the PM 13. And if you look, sure enough, down at the x-axis, that happens right around 7 p.m. on May 17th, so that's very gratifying to see. But maybe the most important piece of this plot is that PM 2.5 does not feel this dust event. Like if you look at PM 2.5, it's flat. If you look at the same 7 p.m. time, within like the margins of uncertainty, it's not feeling any change, which is kind of crazy because you saw that clip and you see the big spike for PM 13. Like there's a lot of stuff in the air, and so if you're only measuring PM 2.5, you're not sampling that. So if you want to get good measurements of dust, you have to go to larger sizes. Another cool thing that we can see from this particular event is where is this dust coming from? And that's probably what this audience cares about the most. And you can see that if you look at a plot like this. This is called a backwards trajectory model. Basically what it's telling you is where the air is coming from at a specific location at a specific time if you walk backwards in time. So here we're starting from the TOMS location, the William Browning building here at the University of Utah, that's WBB. So that's the red star, that's where the TOM sits, and we're starting at the time of the dust event. So when you saw that big peak in my data, that was at 7 p.m. And then we're running the model backwards in time, and the black curves that you see coming out of the star makes it look like a shooting star. Those are tracing out where the air, I guess, is coming from in the past. And if you look closely, you don't even have to look that closely. The black outline, that's the Great Salt Lake. So this air is coming from straight over the Great Salt Lake. So all that dust that you see in the clip, the spike that you see on the data, that's dust getting blown off of the surfaces of those dry, exposed lake beds. And you can also go forward. We don't have to just go backwards. And so you can get a very similar thing, and it would be a forward trajectory. And you're doing the same exact thing here. We're starting at a location in a specific time. Again, we're starting from the TOMS location at the William Browning building at the time of the dust event. And now we're walking forward in time to see where the air at that time is going. And so now this yellow star is the location of those instruments that I showed you earlier that are located up right across from Alta, so in the Wasatch Range. So what you're seeing in this plot is that dust, at that time, at 7 p.m., when there was all that dust that the TOM was measuring, that dust is going straight to the Wasatch. It went right over the Alta site, and it was getting deposited on snow up there. So this is great news for the TOM because, one, it can accurately sample dust. It does a good job of measuring a dust storm. Two, it's located in a really great location to sample dust that's not only coming from the Great Salt Lake, but going to the Wasatch Range. So this instrument can be used for dust on snow studies. Looking ahead, where are we going from here? Obviously, we're not stopping here. The long-term goal is to create what we would call climatology, and basically what we mean by this is doing the same thing that I did with that case study, but just over a very long period of time. Because what we want to see are long-term trends. Ultimately, what we would expect is that the frequency of these dust events, the magnitude of these dust events are increasing over time because the lake is decreasing over time. So that's where we're going, and right now I'm leaving, but a grad student, Joey Bale, he's actively working on this in our group, and yeah, hopefully within the near future we can come up with a good climatology to contribute to the cause. I just want to say thank you for the opportunity to talk to you guys today and to talk about my research. I'm I'm gonna head off to grad school in the fall to pursue PhD, and the Friends of the Great Salt Lake and the people who donate and make the scholarship possible, this research has been a huge, huge part of that journey, so thank you. And I'm happy to take any questions if anybody generated any over the course of that.
Hi. I'm curious how you know where the air is coming from and where it's going.
Yeah, like the back trajectory model.
Yeah, what do you use to figure out where it's coming from?
That's a great
You haven't
question.
measured it until it gets to you.
Yeah. So it's a model. So you're not like using instruments. You're not getting actual like data that's sampled. You're like creating a simulation of what you think is happening. My understanding, I'm not well versed in this model. I just figured out how to get her to work. But my understanding is that it takes in a lot of meteorological information, so like wind speeds and that sort of thing, and it's got algorithms in there that can calculate a bunch of different possibilities for where the air is coming from based on those parameters that it's taking from various different, probably like weather stations and stuff. And you can see there's like a bunch of different paths, so it's not like, no, this is definitely the path the air took. It's giving you some like kind of a spread of generally where the air is coming from. So you can be pretty confident that somewhere in those black paths, the air is actually coming from them, and luckily all of them are crossing the Great Salt Lake, which is what we care about.
Nancy,
Well,
sounds like a super cool experience. I was just curious, knowing that during a lot of the dust on snow events, the dust actually is like in the snow itself.
mhm.
And I was just curious if you looked at if you could detect those intense spikes during the wet deposition.
Yeah, so that is like the task of a different group. There's another group at the university that we've collaborated with a little bit, run by Mackenzie Skiles, and she actually goes up there and like digs around in the snow and looks at the dust on the snow. Oh, you're Otto. I'm sorry, I didn't recognize you. I was just telling you about your own group. That's so embarrassing. I'm gonna stop. Oh yeah, I missed it. I apologize.
That we've had so far, and you're our undergraduate winner of the Doyle Stevens Scholarship last year, and yes, I'm very sorry to give you your certificate when you're late, but we're just really, really proud of Nancy, and I'm so excited for your future work. You just totally crushed it. And I also just wanted to say, earlier today I said, art is really, really helpful, and I just want to reiterate that asking scientific questions about health conditions is also super, super helpful. So thank you, everybody. Nancy did an amazing job.